And good afternoon, Pittsburgh Steelers fans. Welcome to another episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. I am your host, Tony Defeo. Thank you, as always, for joining me on this really not so great Saturday. It's rainy. I didn't know it was supposed to rain today, but whatever. It's still not that cold. And we're only a few days away from Thanksgiving, so lots to look forward to. And as always, before I begin, I want to encourage you to please check out the Behind the Steel Curtain YouTube channel, where we bring you countless podcasts each and every week. There's the Steelers Hangover with yours truly and Brian Anthony Davis every Monday at 5 o'clock. There's the Scobro Show with Dave Schofield and his brother Rich. There's the Steelers Preview with Jeff Hartman, Brian Anthony Davis, and Dave. There's Know Your Enemy with Jeffrey Benedict and Michael Beck. And of course, please check out our audio platform where we have the Let's Ride with Jeff Hartman, the Live Mic with Michael Beck, the Stat Geek with Dave Schofield, the Retro Show with yours truly and Brian Anthony Davis. So please check those out, and you can find those on any audio platform, anywhere you can find a podcast. And please check out Behind the Steel Curtain, where we bring you news, commentary, film breakdown. As we like to say, it's your one-stop shop for all your Steelers needs. So, as always, I have a few topics I'd like to discuss on today's show, starting with last week's 36-10 victory over the Bengals at Heinz Field. That improved the Steelers' record to 9-0. The first time that's the first time they've had that kind of start in the franchise history, which is 1 week after they started 8-0 for the first time in franchise history. So they just keep on rolling. And before I continue, I just want to welcome the folks into the live chat. There's just me, Ryan O'Toole, Steelers Pittsburgh, Tyler Cromie. So thank you guys for joining me, and I hope to find many more in the live chat before today's show is over. I look forward to interacting with you guys. But back to last Sunday's game. There's Wes Hickok, my man Wes. All right. He always has some interesting tidbits and breaking news and stats. So looking forward to interacting with Wes. But it was typical of, I think, most Steelers games this year. It didn't necessarily wow you, at least on offense. It was pretty methodical. The Steelers were pretty efficient inside the red zone. They scored touchdowns on 4 trips out of 5, which you'll take that every week. Like I keep saying, it was like the way their offense functions this year with the short passing game with under Ben. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, you don't feel like you're getting gashed, and if you're watching, you don't feel like you're watching this explosive attack. But you look up at the end of the day, and it's 24 points, 28 points. Last week, 36. They're averaging 30.1 points a game, I believe. So you can't argue with that. As far as on the defensive side, it's what we've come to expect. They got after the rookie Joe Burrow relentlessly, sacked him 4 times, took the football away twice. And unlike previous weeks, they only allowed 10 points. I really credit them with 7. The other 3, the late field goal, I put that on the special teams for allowing the fake punt at the end of the game. That it was already decided. Still, though, it was a great performance by the defense. Maybe the best performance of the year by the defense. You could either argue that game or the Browns game a few weeks earlier, but it was still, no matter how you slice it was a great performance all the way around. And it's funny. It was funny watching that game because at halftime it was 22-7, and according to Twitter, it was like, oh man, what are we going to do to have a better second half? But I mean, I just think that I think that's more. It's indicative of where we are in 2020 as far as the highlight society. It's like if you go on YouTube, you can find the 15-20 minute clip of any game, and it's basically to show you the highlights. And of course, everybody has the red zone packages, so we're not used to seeing like the the ebbs and flows of football games, or I should say, we're not used to experiencing that because we're all about the highlights now and all about the red zone package and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, as I say to people, the great thing about having YouTube and and being able to go back and watch old broadcasts of games from the 70s, those great 70s teams, and the 90s. They had a lot of great teams in the 90s, 2000s. If you go back and watch those games, not just the highlights, you'll see a lot of really good football players making some mistakes, looking ordinary. So, I was very pleased with last Sunday's performance. It was a very businesslike game, and the only question that came out of that game. And by the way, I want to welcome some more people to live chat: Leonardo Torres, Ezra, Snowman, Pappy W. Thank you to everybody who's joining me throughout the show. But where was I? Oh yeah, the only I guess the biggest concern coming out of last week's game had to do with the running game, and it was the third straight week that the team only rushed for 40 plus yards. I think it was 44. The week before that was 46, and before that it was 48. So I guess they're really on a decline. And people were that's been the talk all week on Behind the Steel Curtain, on talk radio, on the internet, everywhere. It's what's up with the ground game. Can they get it? Can they fix it? Well, first of all, I don't think they're going to average 40 plus yards a game the rest of the year. I think they're going to fix it to the point where it's respectable, But there's this concern that at some point this year they're going to need to run a game to execute in order to win a game. But that's just, we don't know that. We don't know that. Do they need to run a game to be effective again? Yeah, of course. You want it to be effective. But at the end of the day, it's ultimately gonna come down to Ben Roethlisberger and the team, the offense executing within the identity that it's established so far this year. And what we've seen so far this year is a short passing game, the jet sweeps, and if they execute those plays, then I don't think the running game is really gonna come back and kill them. I think a lot of people they have this. Well, first of all, it's Pittsburgh, and then it's Steeler Nation as a whole, and we have this mentality that you have to rush the ball, you have to you have to run the ball to win. But really, it's just a matter of doing what you do best to win a football game. And I think you saw that last week against the Bengals. It was great defense, opportunistic defense. They got after Joe Burrow. They confused him. It was a great game for the defense. And the offense, it came down to efficiency. They executed the short passing game. So I think we have this vision in our minds that at some point there's going to be this slobber knocker game where they're going to have to run the ball to win. And even if there's a game that's low scoring and it's a defensive battle, at some point it's probably going to come down to Ben Roethlisberger's arm and whether or not he can execute and make the passes that he has to make it when he has to make them. Like I'm watching this for the retro show for the purposes of our weekly retro show. I'm currently watching a game from 2010 between the Steelers and the Ravens, sort of like a primer for the Thanksgiving game next week. That's probably what you're going to hear on Monday, I'm assuming. And that game was low scoring. It was 13-10, a lot of defense, a lot of hard hits. Ben broke his nose in that game. But what happened at the end? How did they win? Well, first of all, Troy Polamalu strip sacked Joe Flacco and set the Steelers up in prime field position. And Ben hit Isaac Redman for a touchdown pass to win the game 13-10. So it ultimately came down to Ben Roethlisberger's arm, just like it came down to his arm in 2008 so many times. The Steelers only finished 23rd in rushing that year on the way to the Super Bowl, And I went back and jotted down some stats from the last 10 Super Bowl winners. And on average, the last 10 Super Bowl winners, they finished between 14th and 15th it was 14.4, but around 14 in the league in rushing. Last year, the Chiefs finished 23rd. The year before, the Patriots finished 5th. That was pretty good. And the year before that, the Eagles finished 3rd. And the Patriots finished 7th in 2016. But then you go back to 2015, Peyton Manning, that Broncos team, they finished 17th. The Patriots finished 18th in 2014. The Seahawks finished 4th in 2013. The Ravens finished 11th in 2012. The Giants finished dead last in 2011, and the Packers finished 24th in 2010. But if you look at the quarterback list, you have Mahomes, Brady, Foles, which he's not a Hall of Famer, but he has his moments. Certainly an outlier there. Peyton Manning, Russell Wilson, Joe Flacco, who had his best year in 2012. And of course, Eli Manning and Aaron Rodgers. So you have a lot of future Hall of Fame quarterbacks in there, and that's probably had more to do with those teams winning than the running game. And I grew up in the 90s. I didn't grow up in the 90s. I was in my 20s in the 90s, but I was privy to a lot of great Steelers years, as you guys were out there, I'm sure. And they always, Bill Cowher always emphasized rushing the football, right? And they were constantly ranked in the top 5. A couple of times they were ranked number 1 during that 6-year run where they made the playoffs every year. But interestingly enough, the only year that they made the Super Bowl in that run, they finished 12th. So it came down more to the Donald and the 5 receiver set that they implemented under Chan Gailey, who was the offensive coordinator at that time. So I'm not saying the running game isn't important, but what I am saying is it's not going to come down to that. It's whether or not the Steelers ultimately have success in the postseason, which I assume they're going to make the postseason now. Now I know they better, or heads are going to roll. I'm assuming, but it's going to come down to them executing the plays that within the identity that they have established this year. You take last week, for example. There was a play in the first quarter where they ran it was a little receiver pass behind the line of scrimmage. I think it was to Juju or it was to Deontay Johnson. I forget. It was like 3rd and 2 or 3rd and 1, 3rd and 3. It was 3rd and short. I know that. And you've seen them run this play countless times this year and pick up first downs. Well, on this particular play, they didn't. So they didn't execute. Credit to the Bengals defense for snuffing it out. But still, had they executed on that play, had they been on their blocks, the offensive line, tight ends, whoever, then they probably would have picked up a first down. And if you remember a week earlier against the Cowboys, people were harping on the what was it, 4th and 1? They went for it, and they didn't make it. And the Cowboys had one last chance to come back and win that game. But the play before that on the jet sweep, Chase Claypool, it looked like he was. I mean, I called the play before it even happened. That's how much I've seen it so far this year. And he was going to pick up the first down, it would appear, but he was so intent on staying in bounds that he kind of gave himself up and slid before he picked up the first down. And I know why he did that, because coaches are just always preaching, stay in bounds. But whether he went out of bounds or not at that point, I don't know how many timeouts the Cowboys had. But if he gets the first down there, regardless of the timeout situation or anything, and regardless if he goes out of bounds or not, the Steelers would run out the clock at that point. So that play was just a matter of executing. So it's just going to come down to execution. It's obvious that teams have figured out a way to stop the Steelers' run the last few weeks, and now it's up to the Steelers to try to combat that. And I think one of the ways that they do that is by being able to hit on more of these deep balls. I think that would open things up a little bit. And I think one of the biggest problems and I mentioned this last week, is for whatever reason, when Ben drops back to pass and on a deep pass, he doesn't wait a beat. Like usually a quarterback will hit his 5th or his 7th step, and then he'll wait a beat and then throw. Well, it seems like he's hitting that last step and just throwing the ball. You saw the one to Chase Claypool on the near sideline last week. He dropped back, boom, and threw it, and it wasn't even close. It went out of bounds. But if you remember on the deep pass to Deontay Johnson down on the far sideline, I think it was for 46 yards. It was a perfect pass. If you notice on that play, he waited a beat and then threw the ball. And I don't know. This is the first time I've seen, at least in my recollection, it's the first time I've seen Ben be so hurried on deep passes. I don't know if he's just if it's something to do with the line. I mentioned this last week. I don't know if it's something to do with the line, or if he's just skittish from being out a year. If he's afraid of taking a hit, I don't know what it is. But when he drops back to pass on a deep ball, it seems like he's throwing it just as actually he is throwing it just as quickly as he does on a short pass. So I think if they could figure that out, it's certainly affecting the timing and the accuracy and the rhythm. And maybe I'm just imagining it, but that seems to be an issue. So if they can figure that out, I think that would, first of all, go a long way in making the deep ball more effective. Not that they have to have, 5 or 6 deep passes a game, that hit, but it would certainly make it more effective on the 2 or 3 that they do hit, they do try during the game. But ultimately, I don't want to see them just try to establish a run just to do it, just to prove to people that they can do it. It's like when you buy a new electronic device, like I guess a smartphone, and everything that you need on it to works, whether it's for work or just for pleasure, to communicate with people. Everything you need works, but for some reason you can't get this one feature to work, and it's driving you crazy. And every time you try to make it work, you screw up your phone and you lose your contacts or whatever. You have to restart your phone. I don't want to see the Steelers just have to. I don't want to see them try to establish the run just to do it. Like, for example, against the Jaguars on Sunday. I don't want to see them beat their head up against the wall for 25 or 30 plays and make that game closer than it should be. It's like the saying goes, dance with what brung you. We all knew last year that the season would ride on Ben Roethlisberger's arm. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to whether or not he can execute the passing game. And so far, so good. I don't know what the deal is with the people's opinions of him, or I don't try to harp on that stuff too much, but it's clear what he means to this team. Chris Sims and all these people with their rankings, they can rank him wherever they want. It's silly, it's stupid, and I can see why people get all worked up about it. But I don't think there's anybody that if you don't want to include him in that comeback player of the year award because Alex Smith had a more serious injury. I think that's silly because Alex Smith really isn't doing anything. Yeah, it was a grave injury that he suffered, and it's great that he's back. But usually the comeback player of the year is somebody who's effective. Sean Spence suffered a really traumatic, it wasn't life-threatening, but it was a really traumatic injury to his knee in his rookie year. And he came back from that. He wasn't really that effective, but he came back. He didn't win any votes as far as I can remember, so why he's not being seriously considered for that, I don't know, other than the usual nationwide Ben Roethlisberger hatred. And as far as the MVP award and these people not including him in the list of the top quarterbacks, that's just ridiculous. There's just nobody that, again, to repeat myself, there's nobody that means more to their team right now than Ben Roethlisberger does. So, again, to bring it back to the running game, yes, the Steelers are going to have to be effective at some point, but it's not going to come down to them running the ball to win important games, to win playoff games, or win a Super Bowl, whatever. It's going to come down to Ben Roethlisberger, and in conjunction with the defense continuing to do its thing, like it hasn't in a long time as far as getting after the quarterback and certainly taking the football away. I mean, they're on pace for 32 takeaways. They're on pace for 64 sacks. So as long as they stay within their identity as a team, as long as they do what they do best, then I think they're going to be all right at the end. And with that rant completed, that brings to a conclusion the first half of this episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. If you're watching on YouTube, please stay with me. And if you're listening on the audio platform, please download part 2 of this episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. And welcome to part 2 of this episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. I'm your host, Tony Defeo. And thank you to everybody for staying with me in the live chat. There is Thaddeus Kennedy. Who else we have here? See if I can find some new folks. Knight Rider, I love it. Great name. One of my favorite shows as a kid, by the way. That's the show that taught me about how heartless networks are when it comes to canceling shows. They just canceled it one day, and I was like, "What happened to Knight Rider?" And it was gone. But I have one more topic I'd like to discuss, and then I will take some time to. Actually, 2 more topics. I have 2 more topics, and I will take some questions to round out this section of the show. And the next topic I want to discuss is the Steelers' 9-0 record and their pursuit of history. Even though it's kind of early, if you're talking about like a no-hitter, we're still in the 5th inning, 6th inning maybe, but people are starting to wonder now: can they go all the way? Can they make history and be the first team to go 19-0? And does it matter? And my answer to that question is, it matters if it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But this idea, and I've heard this being discussed all week, this idea that they need to lose to get it out of their system, to alleviate the pressure. And I've heard players talk about this on the radio, like former players who were in that situation. Oh yeah, we were 11-0 and we lost. It really took the pressure off, and I think it helped us. Well, first of all, if you're talking about only one team getting a bye in each conference, any loss might prevent them from getting that this year, because the Chiefs are still hot on their tail at 8-1. So, for that reason alone, you have to keep trying to win. And I don't really know what benefit you get out of a loss. People think it's going to humble them or it's going to wake them up. But I mean, they just beat a team 36-10 last week, and all we talked about for the entire week was how bad the running game was. So I think they're grounded in reality. They understand that they're not a perfect football team. Mike Tomlin said that in his press conference. The only perfect thing about us is our record, meaning his football team. So I think they realize, they have some warts and they have some imperfections, and it's just they're not gonna, their heads aren't, they don't need to be humbled, right? So I don't think a loss is gonna help them. It might alleviate the pressure in the regular season, but the postseason pressure, it's like being submerged in water. Wet is wet, right? I mean, whether you're 16-0, 15-1, or 13-3, there's no greater pressure than win or go home, do or die, right? So, I don't, once if they finish the regular season 16-0. Other than answering a few questions about it every week, I don't think there's going to be any more pressure than there would be any other time in the playoffs. Especially in Pittsburgh and with Steeler fans. I mean, what do we always say? Super Bowl or bust. That's true whether you're 16-0 or you enter the playoffs at 10-6 or 9-7. That's what the fans always want. They want a Super Bowl. So, these players that keep saying this, it really helped us. I've watched some America's Game, like the 98, I think it was the 98 Broncos. They started out 11-0 or 12-0 or 13-0, whatever it was. And they lost, and the players talked about, this really helped us but only two teams have ever experienced a perfect regular season. The 72 Dolphins, obviously, they went 14-0, and the 2007 Patriots went 16-0. So they're the only two teams that can really comment on whether or not it helps to get a loss before the playoffs. And obviously the Dolphins went all the way, and they went 17-0, and they made history. And it looked like the Patriots were going to do the same thing. Actually, they were going to go 19-0 and become the quote unquote greatest team of all time. That's how dominant they were that year. But they lost in the Super Bowl. Did they lose in the Super Bowl because of the pressure to go undefeated, or did they lose in the Super Bowl because the Giants had one heck of a front four that made life miserable for Tom Brady? And you know how Tom Brady hates to have any kind of pressure. I mean, most quarterbacks hate pressure, but particularly him. If you make him uncomfortable, then, forget it. So I think it's more the latter when it came to that 2007 Patriots team. They just ran into a team that knew how to beat them and matched up well with them. And it also took a great effort. I can't say I can't say that word. Scratch that. Edit that word out. A great effort by Eli Manning to keep himself alive on a play where it looked like he was going to be sacked. He threw it downfield. David Tyree made one of the greatest catches in NFL history, the helmet catch. So it took all that for the Giants to beat the Patriots. And I don't think the pressure of going 19-0 had anything to do with it. So I don't think the Steelers benefit at all from losing. If it happens, it happens. But I don't think they, quote unquote, need to get it out of their system. I think they just need to keep winning. And if they reach the playoffs if they reach the playoffs 16-0, then the pressure once they get there is not going to be any different than 3 years ago, the last time they made the playoffs at 13-3. The expectations are still going to be Super Bowl or bust. So that's just my opinion on that. I know a lot of people feel differently about it. They think that, it's like a balloon that keeps expanding every week, and they're waiting for that. They're waiting for that bubble to burst so they can get that loss out of the way. But again, I think that's more for the regular season as far as pressure. Postseason, it doesn't matter. The pressure is always going to be intense. So I have one more topic, and that's obviously Sunday's game with the Jaguars. I look for the Steelers to, much like they did against the Bengals, and not so much like they did against the Cowboys. I look for them to go down to Florida and take care of business. Jake Luton is the quarterback. No more Gardner Minshew. I don't know much about him, but I know that he doesn't have many exceptional weapons to throw to. Tyler Eifert's in Jacksonville, and he probably wishes he was back in Cincinnati. Their defense is giving up 30 points a game. They don't have many playmakers. The days of Jalen Ramsey, those days are gone. This is a completely different Jaguars team than the one that they sort of had mega problems with 3 years ago when they lost to them twice. I mean, it's a completely different team. They've given up 28 sacks through 9 games. So I look for the Steelers to really take advantage of them. And I look for – I'm predicting maybe their biggest win of the year as far as a point spread. I realize James Robinson is a heck of a rookie running back, and he has 689 yards, and I think he has 200 and some receiving yards. So he's going to be a handful. But I think if they can contain him, and they've had their issues with stopping the run as of late. They gave up 139 yards last week, but if they can contain him, like they have Alou back. I think Mike Hilton's going to be back, so they're going to be at as close to full strength as they could possibly be without Devin Bush. So I look for them to at least contain him, if not totally stop him. And I look for this to be a fairly easy day for them. With the Ravens on the horizon, I don't think they're going to be overlooking them. I think that they know what's at stake. I think they know that they have to keep their foot on the gas and stay ahead of the pack, stay ahead of the Chiefs as far as that number 1 seed in the AFC. So I don't look for a letdown. I really don't. So I think it's going to be a good day. And I think the Steelers are going to be 10-0 for the first time in franchise history. They're going to improve their greatest start ever for the third week in a row. So that's all I have for today, and I will take 10 minutes or so and answer some questions. So let's see what we got here in the live chat. Yes, here's one from West Hitchcock, a comment. Minshew most likely will not play. Yeah, I haven't heard anything about him. It's all been about the other guy, Jake Luton. It's going to be him that's going to go tomorrow, and much like they did with Joe Burrow, I look for them to confuse him, and like they do most great defenses do against rookie quarterbacks, not just the Steelers, but they seem to have a pretty good knack for making life miserable for rookie quarterbacks. Here's a brief comment from Ryan O'Toole. Fun show as always, Tony. Thank you for that. I love the positive feedback. Here's a comment from Portna Quinba. Which was a less consequential offseason move, trading for Chris Wormley or signing Derek Watt? Yeah, it's I think that's another thing that's indicative of 2020. I mean, every move is put under a microscope because it's 24/7 coverage. I mean, we have obviously talk radio, we have podcasts like this one, we have sites like Behind the Steel Curtain. So maybe these guys get more pubbed or they get hyped up more than maybe they should. I'm kind of Chris Wormley. He's I don't think he was ever brought in to be a starter. He was brought in more to be a decent backup. And the way Alua has played, I mean, he wasn't gonna get many snaps anyway, whether he was injured or not. I mean, Alua has been fantastic this year, and of course, you're never gonna replace Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt. They're just Pro Bowlers. So I'm more disappointed with Derek Watt and his health, because I think he could help a little bit with the running game as far as on short yardage situations. I think he's a pretty decent blocker. As far as him being a factor and catching the ball out of the backfield, I never really put much stock into that, because I didn't think he was going to be on the field all that often in those kind of situations. I think more often than not, they take Ben takes the snap out of the shotgun. So, you're not going to have a Derek Watt in there very often, but in certain situations, I think they may have missed him, with his injuries. And of course, he's an exceptional special teams player. And, overall, their special teams has been awesome this year. So they really haven't missed him in that regard, but he's certainly somebody you'd like to have in there, at least for that. So if I had to pick one person, I'd have to say Derek Watt, as far as who I'd think is a more disappointing signing up to this point. Let's see here. Well, let's see. Here's a comment from Ezra about free agency. Other than Ferrier, Ryan Clark, Steven Nelson, we suck at free agency. Well, that's because there have been some effective signings in recent. I think Ladarius Green was just bad luck. I don't think they realized how severe his concussion situation was, and maybe they should have did their homework there. But I think he could have really helped them had he stayed healthy. But yeah, I mean, they don't really have a great track record with free agents, but then again, they don't really go after the high end free agents either. They're usually about signing the guys that like Steven Nelson. I mean, my goodness, here's a guy who came in and helped complete a secondary that they had been trying to build forever. I mean, Joe Hayden, he's not a traditional free agent. He was a cap casualty at the end of training camp by the Browns, and they scooped him up right away. So, it's guys like Hardings. I mean, there's a guy that kind of goes under the radar as far as a great free agent pickup by them back at the turn of the century. Right. I think he was before Ferrier. I think he was 2001. He was after Dermontti Dawson and before Pouncey. But he played on that Super Bowl 40 team, and he was fantastic. So, I mean, they have had some really good free agent signings. It's not, but I think if you looked at most teams, you'd probably find the same thing. It's I think most teams have a pretty low batting percentage when it comes to free agency. It's just when you really think about it, you're getting the players that other teams didn't think were good enough to franchise tag. That's how I always look at it. I mean, there are a lot of good free agents out there, but I mean, football is the ultimate team game, and I think it's a lot of times it's hard for a player to come in and fit into a particular system in football than it is in other sports like baseball or basketball or hockey. Let's see what else we have here. Any more questions? All right. See if we have any more questions. No. More comments and questions today. Let's see. Here's a comment from Wes Hickok. I do agree. Pittsburgh takes shots on guys who are at the cheaper end of the market, and sometimes it ends up being bad. Yeah. I mean, especially lately, the last decade or so, that's how they've had to operate, because they don't have the cap space. Here's one from Ollie Howard about Dante Moncrief, he calls him. Well, I mean, that was more of a move they had to make out of necessity, because they weren't prepared for the Antonio Brown meltdown last offseason, the 2019 offseason. And so they brought him in, and they hoped that he would at least be a veteran presence for them. And he was awful. There's no other way to say it. Here's one from, I can't wait to see this one. The first half of this question seems pretty interesting, from Donald Nolan. Wait a minute. Where do we go here? I always screwed it up. There we go. Tony, did you see the Fat Man movie? Mel Gibson playing Edgy Santa? No, I don't think I ever saw that movie. I don't. I agree. Here's a comment from Wes. To be completely honest, I actually thought Deontay would be good. Me too. I thought he would be that veteran amongst all the youngsters, with Juju and James Washington and Deontay Johnson. It was his first year in 2019. I thought he would really be a good find for them, but I think he had a broken finger or something, and that was it. He just couldn't catch a cold. And that was 2019 was the last year you were allowed to catch a cold before people freaked out. So maybe that's a good thing. But anyway, yeah, it wasn't a good signing at all. And here's one from Pappy W. Moncrief apparently is signed on the Patriots practice squad. Oh, that's pretty interesting. So pretty big fall from grace from him from last year. All right. Here's Donald Nolan following up with the Mel Gibson comment. It's a new movie just out recently. Great flick. Mel Gibson is great as disgruntled Santa. Great story too. That sounds awful lot like Bad Santa. We haven't seen a whole lot of Mel Gibson in the last few years. So I guess it's interesting that he's back making movies again. I'll have to check that out. And here's one from Steelers Pittsburgh. He brings up Jericho Cotchery, and that's a great point. There's an example of a great veteran signing. He was a steadying presence, a good player in the locker room. I'm not surprised that he's a coach now, an assistant coach, and he'll probably be. I could certainly see him being a head coach someday. Moore's another one. There's a guy he was an unheralded free agent, running back, and look at all the important plays he made for them in that Super Bowl 43 year when Willie Parker was hurt a lot. Rashard Mendenhall was lost for the year early on. He really saved their bacon a lot that year. So you can find some really good free agents at a bargain basement price, and sometimes they're the ones that wind up paying off more than the splashy free agent signings. So here's one from Wes, a question from Wes. So Tony, do you think there is any other coach beyond Tomlin who could justifiably be named Coach of the Year right now? Good question. I mean, 9-0, it's hard to beat, honestly. I'm trying to think of any surprise teams out there, and there really aren't any surprise teams. I mean, the work he did last year was Coach of the Year worthy, in my opinion, keeping them 8-8 or keeping them in playoff contention without Ben. And this year, I mean, keeping them focused through all the COVID stuff, the protocols, and they had their first scare last week with Vance McDonald testing positive, and a few other players having to go into the protocol for a week. So he's really kept them focused. And with Ben back, he's taken them to where a lot of people thought he could take them with the defense in better shape than it's been in years. And he's taken them even further than we thought. No, who would have thought 9-0, right? So I really can't think of one. And from what I understand, he's not even in the discussion, right? I mean, it's kind of funny. It's when you even praise Mike Tomlin, people bring up his failures from the past, namely the 2010s, and I maintain that decade was more of a transitional decade than people want to realize. I mean, they had a great run in the 2000s. They won 2 Super Bowls, and then the beginning of the 2010s, they made it back to another one. Well, that team got old. The defense got old. A lot of the offensive players, like Hines Ward, they got old. They moved along, and as often happens, or oftentimes what happens in that case is teams just fall off a cliff, and they're 4-12, 5-11, 6-10. It's bad. But he never. I mean, and they had some very shaky rosters in the early part of that decade, especially 2012, 2013. I don't think people realize how bad that roster was in 2013, especially. And he kept them afloat. He kept them in it. And they only had one game that entire decade. Well, actually, one game in his entire tenure as head coach where they were out of the playoffs at kickoff, where they were eliminated from the playoffs at the start of the game. So, I mean, that says something. So people, they want to harp on them underachieving, with Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, and those players, but basically it was the killer bees and an average defense. And I think this year, and I said this all off season, could be the most complete team that they've had in a very long time. And I think you're seeing that come to fruition now with this 9-0 start. So, just like Ben, he doesn't get the credit he deserves. I don't know what it is about this. I think a lot of with the national media, I think a lot of it is, we're so passionate about this team that I think, it's human nature to respond more to negative to the negative than it is to the positive. So I think a lot of these people out there, I swear that they're just like, people always talk about clickbait with us when we write stuff, but I think this is classic with a lot of these guys like Adam Schneid and that list that Chris Sims put out last week. I mean, come on, this is classic clickbait. You want people to engage and be outraged, and I think that's a lot of what you see when it comes to the Steelers, and because it's almost like people are either you don't know football or you're going out of your way to be negative about the team, and that's fine. I mean, I don't think it really matters. The only thing that matters is whether or not they win a Super Bowl. If Ben wins comeback player of the year and they fall short in the playoffs, people aren't going to really care all that much about that. If he wins MVP and they lose in the playoffs, they're not going to, care. If Mike Tomlin is coach of the year and they lose in the playoffs, it's going to be hashtag fire Mike Tomlin again on social media. So, bottom line is if they win a Super Bowl this year, then they can shut a lot of people up. And people, one of the interesting things I'd like to talk about when it comes to Ben is, and I've seen this asked a lot this week, if they win a Super Bowl this year, does he retire? And I say no. First of all, he has $37 million as a reason to come back. And second of all, he's playing with house money at that point. How many quarterbacks have won 3 Super Bowls? I mean, it's just a handful. So, once he gets to that echelon, I mean, he's in rarefied air. Now it's just a matter of whether or not he can catch Terry Bradshaw. And I think he's going to want to come back and try to do that. I think he's going to, one of his boyhood heroes was John Elway. Well, how did John Elway go out? He won a Super Bowl his first one after a longest time. And then he came back and won another one. So I think he's going to want to try that. So let's see if we have one or two more questions, and I'll call it a day. All right. Yes, here's a sarcastic one from Ryan O'Toole, and I think it's pretty fitting because that's how a lot of people act. The Steelers are the world's worst team. They're certainly the world's worst 9-0 team if you go by a lot of the experts, who I think a lot of people still think that the Ravens are gonna beat them in if not in the AFC North, certainly in the playoffs. I think that's just, you hear this a lot about Mike Harbaugh or John Harbaugh. He's better than Tomlin. Okay, where's the proof? He won a Super Bowl and their team struggled to even finish at 500 for a number of years. So, it was great that he signed drafted Lamar Jackson, and he was a good enough coach to build his offense around him. But they're one and done the last 2 years. So, where do people? I think it's more like people they look at other situations and they go, "Oh, John Harbaugh, he's doing less with more, or more with less, I should say." And Tomlin's doing less with more. That's always been the another criticism of his, which I think is kind of unfounded. So, I think I might have. I'm sorry, I screwed up. Ryan O'Toole and Wes Hickok. I told you Wes would be a valuable member of today's show. He alerted me to my mistake. Ryan O'Toole is saying the Steelers are the world's team. Okay, that's right. That's a completely different sentiment. And I just I was rambling on and on, and I missed it. But you are right. They are the world's team. They're certainly when you hear about the Steeler bars that are all over the world, everywhere it seems like when people from Pittsburgh, they always have these stories. When they travel anywhere in the world, they always run into people that have Steeler jerseys on, or they find the Steeler bar. So I think it's pretty neat, and it's really amazing how that's how much this organization has grown worldwide since the 70s. I mean, because this was basically a nothing franchise for 40 years, and now it's arguably the most popular one in the world. The Cowboys ratings be damned. So on that note, I'm gonna bid you guys adieu, and the next time I see you, I'll have two games to talk about: the Jaguars game and Thursday's Ravens game. But I'll certainly be talking to a lot of you again on Monday on the Hangover with Brian. So I'll see you then. But for everybody else, if I don't see you on Monday, have a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and go Steelers.